Mega Wellness Summit. I'm your host, Nikki Jensen. As you know, I suffer from a gluten intolerance. Today's topic is something you will want to listen in closely. If you suffer from celiac disease, gluten intolerance, or if you think you might have an allergy to gluten, then gluten-free expert Jennifer Fugo is your girl to answer all of your questions. I have learned a lot from Jennifer over the past year or so that I've been following her, and I'm blown away by the knowledge and the simplicity that she makes the gluten-free lifestyle out to be. I know when I first went gluten-free, it was tough, not only to nix gluten out of my life, but to understand fully all the foods and products that contain gluten. But Jennifer makes it simple. She is the founder of Gluten-Free School and teaches gluten-sensitive individuals simple, savvy, and empowering steps to get healthy. Jennifer has been living gluten-free since early 2008 after a gluten sensitivity diagnosis. She is a sought-after expert, advocate, and speaker about healthy gluten-free living. Jennifer has been featured on Dr. Oz, Yahoo News, eHow, CNN, and Philadelphia Magazine. She is also the best-selling author behind the groundbreaking book, The Savvy Gluten-Free Shopper, How to Eat Healthy Without Breaking the Bank. Welcome, Jennifer Fugo. Thank you so much for being part of the Mega Wellness Summit.
Well, thank you for having me, Nikki. I'm really excited to be here and share what I know with everybody that's listening.
You are just amazing, and I love everything about you. I love all your posts on Facebook, your emails, everything that you have to say is just spot on, and your knowledge is far beyond what many people know about celiac disease, going gluten-free. My first question for you is, for those who don't know what gluten is, can you tell people what is gluten?
That's a great question. It's a good place to start. Gluten is a spongy protein that we're predominantly familiar with it being in wheat, but it is also in several other grains that we all are familiar with, like barley, rye. Some of us may have heard of spelt. It's a trendier form of wheat. And it is also in oats, but not because oats necessarily contain gluten, but because oats, in the way that they are harvested and processed, get contaminated by gluten because wheat and oats tend to share the same equipment. So I always tell people when they ask me, where is gluten? Like, how do I know what it's in? You want to remember the acronym BROWS. BROWS. It stands for barley, rye, oats, which are contaminated, wheat, and spelt. And I just want to point out, I did say oats that are contaminated, but you can buy gluten-free oats. So if you know that you have a gluten sensitivity or an intolerance, or you have celiac disease or any other autoimmune disease where you find that gluten is contributing to issues, so you're taking gluten out, you'll want to look for those gluten-free oats that are marked and labeled and tested so that you know that you're getting a product that's not contaminated. So in essence, that protein is causing issues in the digestive system, and gluten is sort of we'll just call it like an umbrella for several different proteins in that category that cause issues, but that's the big one, and that's the one that most of us know.
So I know that you have a gluten intolerance, right? Do you have celiac disease?
That's a good question. So I don't know if I have celiac disease. I was diagnosed with a gluten sensitivity or an intolerance. And I do want to clarify for people who hear those terms and wonder what the difference is. They're the same thing. Gluten intolerance and a gluten sensitivity, it's the exact same thing. Those terms are used interchangeably. So if you hear them throughout the course of this call, either or, we're talking about the same thing. Mm-hmm. So I was diagnosed in 2008 with a gluten sensitivity after I had initially taken gluten out, and within 3 days, I noticed a night and day difference in my health.
What did you notice?
Well, so initially I had gone to a nutritionist's office because I had extreme fatigue to the point where I would sleep between 9 and 12 hours a night, right there, that's a red flag, 9 and 12 hours a night, and then would have to be woken up by someone else, namely my husband, shaken and like really coaxed out of bed, and I felt like I was drugged. So right there we have a major problem around sleep, and I couldn't get any help with my family doctor. All my blood tests came back normal. He really didn't have any answers for me of what was going on. I have never drank coffee. I'm not a caffeine user, nor have I ever been. So there were some like major issues that, lifestyle-wise couldn't be explained. I wasn't going to bed really late and trying to like sleep just 4 hours a night and crashing. I was going to bed at a reasonable hour and having this problem. And so when I went to see the nutritionist, that was my concern. And her thoughts were that, you eat a lot of gluten. And I didn't know what gluten was. I'm from an Italian family, so I loved my pasta and bread.
Me too.
And was really surprised to find out that this thing, because that's what it was to me, this thing in the pasta and bread was potentially causing all these problems. And okay, sure, I'll try for a few days. I'll take it out and I'll see what happens. Well, within 3 days, again, I was just fixated on the fatigue. That was all I thought was the problem. Although she did point out to me that my potential digestive problems of like gas and bloating and the weight gain that I had put on and diarrhea, like that was actually a red flag. But I was like, oh, that's normal, like I've had that for years. I had no clue. And so anyway, I took within 3 days of taking gluten out, I had really bad gas. The gas had stopped. My digestive system had like completely quieted down. I wasn't having these moments where my stomach would hurt so bad, and I had to go sprint to the bathroom so badly, or else I was going to have an accident. That's embarrassing. But I thought it was normal. I didn't realize that those were actually not normal things, because a lot of people in my family have them. And in taking gluten out, that stopped.
Wow.
And so after 3 days, my husband said to me, something's up. Something's different. It's good different. I like it, but you should mention this to your nutritionist. And at that point was when she suggested that we do further food allergy testing, or food sensitivity testing, I should say, which is different from food allergy testing. I want to just point out to everybody, because when we say food allergy testing, most people would tend to think, oh, I'm going to go to my allergist and I'll get that stuff put on my back and it'll show me if I have hives. That's not the same as food sensitivity testing. Food sensitivity testing is looking for antibodies in your blood to particular substances. So like gluten, eggs, dairy, cucumbers, lettuce, any number of things that might seem, harmless to you, your body can have a reaction to.
It's just a blood test.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And so I had the blood test done, and it turned out that I had a few incidents where I would have that I had to rush to the bathroom, but I had eaten no gluten. It turned out that I have very high sensitivity to eggs, almost like it was off the charts. It was the highest the nutritionist had ever seen in any of her patients. I had a fairly significant sensitivity to dairy products, and then the cruciferous family, so me and kale are not friends even to this day, as well as the cashew family, and then gluten. So I had a pretty hefty list of things to take out. And after being gluten, egg, and dairy-free for about 8 weeks, and really hardcore, like I did not cheat and I was good about it, I had lost the nearly 20 pounds that I had put on. I just want to clarify, wasn't eating like a Italian American diet and then went to paleo or low carb. I was switched to gluten-free bread, which was horrible at the time, by the way, and gluten-free pasta. I just switched everything out. So I wasn't dieting or something or trying to avoid carbs. And then my stomach quieted down. The rashes that I had, these spirally rashes on my arms and legs, went away that I just thought was eczema or psoriasis. I just didn't know what it was. I just thought, whatever, it'll go away. I stopped getting headaches, and I learned when I would get glutened, the chronic headaches that I had since I was in high school, so for well over 10 years at that time, were because of gluten. So I was taking lots of Tylenol for almost a decade because I thought that it was just these headaches, but it was gluten the entire time. And
this is going to be interesting because people think that this is their norm, but there's actually something triggering it, and it could be a food allergy.
Exactly, and that's, I think, the thing that for anyone listening to this and saying, like, oh, I have these symptoms, but I ignore them, like, whatever, I live with them, my whole family has this problem, whatever, it's normal. And if this is especially true, if someone says to you, hey, it's not normal that that's happening, and your reaction is like defensiveness and be like, oh, whatever, my dad does this, or I've always had this problem, that's a red flag. Yeah. Because usually we cannot see the problems that we have, and we oftentimes don't realize how bad we feel until we remove the food and toxins and chemicals and stressors in our lives. It's like the sun comes out as the clouds clear, and you realize, like, wow, I've actually been feeling like dirt for a really long time. And so for me, it was the case, and I will say too, if you have chronic low immunity to like the colds and the flus, maybe if this past winter you were getting sick a lot, there was stomach viruses and there was like a respiratory thing. If you're getting sick all the time and really susceptible, it's another potential red flag that you could actually have gluten depresses your immunity. So. Right. I was getting sick all the time, and that was one of the big things that we found. So the fatigue was not like chronic fatigue syndrome or that I wasn't sleeping well and I was disturbed in the middle of the night. It was literally that I was eating something that was running my system down so much that I had no energy in order to function throughout the day.
Now, you mentioned that you were allergic to eggs. Are you allergic to casein, which is protein?
So I am sensitive to eggs, and typically, from my understanding, people are more sensitive to the egg white as opposed to the egg yolk because there's more of the proteins found in egg white.
Interesting.
I have not tested out the theory of trying the yolk, although some people have suggested I do that. But the last time I had eggs, I thought I was having a heart attack and was about to take myself to the emergency room. So I have not. This was 2008. I still haven't gotten past that because it was such a horrible, painful, awful incident. Dairy intolerance was specifically casein. So I can use ghee, no problem. And I have found over the years as I've worked on my gut and such, I can tolerate some different cheeses to a degree, but I cannot tolerate milk or yogurt. Those both make me incredibly nauseous and sick to my stomach, so I don't do those. But some cheese is okay here and there.
I went gluten-free in 2009. I thought gluten-free was healthy food, and so I just did everything gluten-free, which was, the gluten-free cakes and cookies and brownies, like everything that I could find that was gluten-free, I ate it. I gained weight. And I actually was on the borderline of being a diabetic because the sugar that I was consuming was so off the charts. Did you experience anything like that? I know that you lost weight.
Right. So I did lose weight. The result for me was that I actually ended up with adrenal fatigue and candida almost exactly a year after I went gluten-free.
Now, can you explain what candida is?
Yes. Candida is, well, when you say yeast infection, that's candida. Candida is yeast. And you always have yeast in your body. I think it's a misunderstanding that I would say Americans, but I guess North Americans, I assume like we have probably a wide range of people listening to this who live in different countries in North America and whatnot. We have this misunderstanding that it's all or nothing. I want all my gut bacteria should be good. I want no bad gut bacteria. I want no yeast, no candida. That's not practical. You're always going to have a mishmash of good guys living in your gut as well as bad guys. The key is you want to keep the bad guys in check. You want the good guys to outnumber the bad guys and keep them in check. The problem is with gluten-free foods is that they are incredibly sugary, number one. Mm-hmm. They typically contain more sugar than their gluten-filled counterparts. Mm-hmm. And the additional problem is that most of the flours and the starches that are used to bake or added to gluten-free recipes are incredibly high glycemic. Mm-hmm. So they turn to sugar quickly in the body, and that might not make sense to a lot of folks here. You might think like, oh, well, I'm having a gluten-free bagel. There's no sugar in that. It's just, the flour. Maybe there's a little bit of sugar and some other things, but there's no sugar really in it. The problem is that there's very little fiber in gluten-free products, and the majority of the carbohydrates, after you subtract out what added sugar there is, in addition to the fiber, the little minuscule amount of fiber that there is in those foods, all of those carbs have to be broken down to glucose when they get to your gut in order to be absorbed into the body. You can't absorb these carbohydrates that aren't going to break down quickly, And no, everything has to be broken down to glucose or whatever monosaccharide or simple sugar. That's how the food gets into you, and your body then knows how to deal with it and process it and metabolize it. The problem is like rice flour, potato flour, tapioca flour, corn flour, and all their starches that you might see listed as well. They're all really high glycemic. Mm-hmm. So if you've got like we'll just take pasta for example. If you've got a pasta that, has 20 or 30 grams of carbs in it and 2 grams of fiber, well, I hate to break the news to you, but you've either got 18 or 28, depending on what the carb number is. That's a lot of sugar. That's a lot of grams of sugar. And every 4 grams of sugar is 1 teaspoon of sugar. So it feeds the bad bacteria. It feeds the yeast. And for me, it increased. So that's where, again, this balancing act in the gut is so important. It increased the amount of the bad bacteria, the yeast that live there, because that's their food. That's their buffet. They're happy. If you have Candida, it wants you to eat sugar. It wants you to eat carby, starchy things, whether it's gluten-free or not. It doesn't care. It just wants sugar because that's what it eats. The good bacteria don't eat that.
Makes sense. Now, did you experience any bumps in the road going gluten-free?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The food prep is the problem, and where you don't realize, when you don't verbalize that you need gluten-free, when you don't say it when you're making your reservation, when you don't say it when you get to the hostess stand, when you don't say it before you place an order, and they go, oh, by the way, as the waiter's walking away from you to put your order in that you want to tell him you're gluten-free, those are all reasons why people get sick when they're eating out. Mm-hmm. And then I would say the last piece of it was a more emotional piece. It was really hard for me to feel so different. Now I don't care. My health is the most important thing because my whole life is based around, me feeling well and treating my body as if it's a temple and doing what I can to eat in a way that's supportive of good health. But there was a period where it was really hard. And I think part of it was that I was not clear on making me a priority. It really requires a dedication to you as the number one priority. Mm-hmm. Because if you don't, it's really easy for your friends to convince you with that piece of pizza to eat it. Because I have to admit it smells good.
Right.
But I know now, I would never touch a piece of pizza. Like, I've even gone so far to buy gluten-free and grain-free cat food for my cat because I do handle it. I do have to touch it periodically, and I never want to forget or have the cat licking itself and there's gluten on its fur. I really try to make a point to make my life suit what I need to be so that I can thrive. And I think that's a really important key.
And I don't even know why animals need gluten in their food anyway. That doesn't make any sense to me.
No. Yeah, I mean, I didn't think about corn. A lot of pet food, the first ingredient or second is corn, and I'm like, I've never seen a cat or a dog climb a corn stalk and eat corn. Don't get me wrong, but I've just never seen that before. But like I said, it's about doing what you need to do. And I would say, caution too, if you've got moms listening, which I'm sure we do, you've got to be really careful with your kids because it's very easy for kids to want to put their hands in your mouth and to touch your food and to touch your stuff. And so there is an increased challenge when you have a young child or a baby in the household. So if you yourself need to be gluten-free, you're going to have to cook gluten-free. I don't cook multiple meals in this home. So if my husband wants to eat gluten, he's got to go buy it. But you've got to be careful with kids because there's, I think, just a real increased susceptibility. It's in Play-Doh. It's in a lot of adhesives, and which are accessible to kids.
Good point. Very good point. And, people think that gluten-free is really expensive. And I know that the products can be expensive. In your book, you have a whole other plan that teaches people that that's not necessarily the truth of it, that this can be an affordable lifestyle.
Yeah, it totally can. And the only reason I know this is because my husband got laid off and was out of work actually for well over 4 years. And so it was around the time when I had adrenal fatigue and had to really change things up a lot. And I had to go to practitioners who were not covered by my insurance. So I had to pay out of pocket for everything, and I had to pay for all these supplements and these tests and everything. And I had to figure it out. And it's one thing, in hindsight, it really sucked at the time. I'll be entirely honest. Being stuck in that condition where your health is not good and you feel horrible and you've got to go to all these doctor appointments and you've got all these medical bills and all this stuff. I'm so sure that people can relate to this because I've spoken to so many people, and especially women who can. It stinks. But the one thing that I learned from it, and I would hope that even if you're on the fence about being gluten-free or you're on the fence about anything, whether you want to do this lifestyle or you're just trying to figure it out and be compliant 100%, the one thing that I would hope that every person listening would take away from this conversation is this. Anything in life is figure-outable. As long as you decide that you are going to figure it out, and you do everything in your power to figure it out because you have to, you will figure it out. And I had to figure it out, which is why I have all these tips and tricks and hacks and stuff. And I decided, because clients would tell me, Jen, this is too much information. I'm getting overwhelmed. You keep just rattling off different ideas. I decided to condense it into a book. The thing that I learned, and this is my primary rule that I teach everyone, you, number one, want to eat healthy. That should be the first checkbox that you need to check off when you're, asking yourself, is this food or this dish a good idea? The second thing is it gluten-free? You want to eat a diet that's healthy. And for me, I also want to eat a diet that happens to be gluten-free. I'm not looking at labels because I'm eating real food. And oftentimes real food is a lot less expensive because gluten-free products have been found to be on average 242% more expensive than their gluten-filled counterparts. That's crazy.
Yeah,
so
that's because it has the gluten-free label on it.
Exactly. And look, I'm not trying to insinuate that companies are trying to, pull one over on us. I mean, I think to some degree they are, as far as trying to say that gluten-free pumpkin cupcakes or muffins are healthy for you. They're oh, it's healthy. They have fiber. Who cares? They're still muffins or cupcakes, But the point is that they have a lot of other expenditures that the gluten-free community is requiring of them. That costs money, and that's passed down to the consumer. So the way around that is, number one, you want to get yourself, there's 2 books, aside from mine. One is Cecilia's Marketplace, or Gluten-Free Marketplace, and the other is from Triumph Dining. They have a grocery store guide. They will tell you what products throughout the entire grocery store, not just in the gluten-free aisle, are gluten-free. They have done that legwork for you. So I found out that my grocery store, which I thought was pretty limited to just the produce and meat section and then the gluten-free aisle, was actually a lot more gluten-free friendly than I had initially thought. And I found out that, say, like my local grocery store, and I'm not talking Whole Foods because Whole Foods is ridiculously expensive, and if you're trying to do a budget, that is not the place to shop. For key items, yes, but not your entire, because one little bag, $80, easy. What I did was I thought, wow, I'm going to start paying attention to these things, like where I can save money. And so, I was saying about the store brand. My grocery store's store brand frozen vegetables, which, mind you, are significantly less expensive than fresh ones, were gluten-free. And that was great. So, for example, I want to give because I know everybody's thinking, like, oh, my gosh, you're telling me to eat frozen vegetables. I thought we were supposed to eat fresh. Well, number one, frozen vegetables are great if you're putting them into a cooked dish. They're great, like a crock pot dish or a soup or a stew or something that is cooking, because that way you don't necessarily notice that they weren't fresh, right? Because you're not expecting a crisp vegetable in the first place. They're great for getting vegetables into meals and bulking it up, so that way you can make one piece of protein go a lot farther rather than having to load up and have this huge steak that covers half your plate. You use the flavorings, and then you can add in, if you eat legumes, great, they're a great source of protein, along with, especially when they're paired with rice, for example, because it creates a complete protein, those two together. But, buying your bags of rice that are gluten-free and cooking them yourself. Get a cheap rice cooker from Target for $17. I've had mine for 10 years now. It has done me so many favors. And I freeze rice. I used to freeze quinoa when I ate it. I don't eat much of it anymore, but rice you can freeze in the freezer, so you can cook a big batch. You can do the same with beans. You cook them on the stove. One bag will cost you $1 as opposed to a can that'll cost you $1 or $2 or $3. And you cook them on the stove. You can freeze them as well so that they go farther. Mm-hmm. The frozen vegetables, a bag of green beans, for example, you could get when they're on sale for $1. A bag of fresh green beans, depending on the season and the time of year, could be $1.59, maybe $2, maybe more. So you're saving money in these places, and you're sneaking vegetables into things that you might not think add them to. So they're a really great resource. And then I started to notice from talking to the meat department that a lot of the meats would go on sale at a particular day of the week. So I started to go to the grocery store on those days, and when they have to mark meat down, they mark it 50% off because it has to go. They can't keep it anymore. It doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. It just means that it's getting to its sell-by date. And so I would buy grass-fed beef cubes, for example, for 50% off. And I'd buy the whole thing, 6 or 8 containers of it, and put it in my freezer. And so I'd have that all in for long to make beef stew. So there's a lot of different things that you can do to save money. Produce stores, you can actually do coupons and things like that for grocery stores. Usually the front page of their circular, the front page and a half, is typically produce. So there are ways. Fish is typically, you're not going to get a deal on wild caught fish. That's one area that you're going to have to spend the money. And I would suggest to people that if you are going to buy, I will say this, I figured out a way and a system, which I, have outlined in my book so much, but I was able to buy grass-fed beef. I was able to buy the wild-caught fish because I found ways to save in other spots. So you want to prioritize what's most important to you. I don't really do dairy, so for me, I wanted to buy better quality meat and fish, and I was able to do that. So, and if you're okay, I want to reduce toxins, then okay, maybe you're going to go to the Dirty Dozen list. You might not buy everything organic, but you might avoid the conventionally grown strawberries. But when it comes to onions, you'll get the regular conventional ones because those are pretty low down on the Dirty Dozen list. So you have these give and takes based on your own preference and also on your own budget. But I was able to do this for a nutrition class I was taking at the time and actually succeed in doing a very nutrient-dense diet for a woman who was on food stamps. And my professor, who was an RD, was shocked that I was able to come up and abide by the diet that we were supposed to give her, but that we were also supposed to abide by the like $40 that I was able to spend that week. And she was like, this is the most amazing thing I've ever done. How did you do this? And I was like, oh yeah, I did. I told her what I did. And I said, by the way, next week I'll be able to buy more things because I have food left over from this week. So it does really work. It takes a little bit of work. I'm not going to say that it's like super easy, but it's not a total DIY, like you're in the kitchen all day type of thing, but you can absolutely save money and eat well and gluten-free at the same time. You have to utilize the leftovers when people are throwing food away. And so I will clarify this. If you're a person that does not do leftovers, you are spending more money. Like, there is no way around it. You are going to have a lot of food waste, and you're not going to be able to get the budget down. But if you can, like I can make a soup in my crock pot, and I don't mind eating something 4 days out of the week. Like, that doesn't bother me.
Right.
So for me, I can have soup 4 times. My husband might have it once because he works, so he might have it one evening or one day for lunch, and then I'll freeze the rest for portions later on. So there's some weeks where my freezer is like loaded, and I just eat out of the freezer, like defrosting things and adding more vegetables to them. Maybe I roast some sweet potatoes, and have it as a meal. So again, it's about being creative and thinking outside the box. And I hope that everyone that listens to this, like regardless of what your circumstances, like financially or where you are in your gluten-free diet or just in your journey in general, that you remember this one thing. Everything is figure-outable. You just have to put your mind to it and decide that there is no other way. You've got to find a way. And if you look at every problem from that position, it puts you in a place of control, and you will find a way to make, whatever you need to happen. You can do it.
Absolutely. I love that. Now, in your book, you talk about working the grocery store.
Well, what I had talked about in the book, which I think is so important and people don't realize, is that the grocery store involves an incredible amount of marketing, of psychology, and all sorts of stuff to get us to buy things that are more expensive. And so it's just learning when the meat goes on sale. Most people have no clue when the meat goes on sale, and they don't want to touch the meat that's 50% off because they think it's gross or icky or any other number of things. They also think that all that food on the end caps or that all the food that's at eye level, well, that's all paid for. All that stuff up front at the register, that's all paid for. Millions and millions of dollars paid to the supermarkets to put and to position those products in that spot. And so how can we outsmart the supermarket and get the deals and find the sales and find the different things in the grocery store that don't cost nearly as much? So like I said, there's this idea that when you go into the grocery store, we should shop the perimeter. And I honestly think that that's a very misleading statement because there actually are a lot of healthy things on the inside. You just don't know how to look for them. And you don't know what you're looking at. And so oftentimes it's just having a greater awareness. There's a circular every week that gets dropped at your house. You should probably look at that and see so-and-so has the avocados on sale this week for $1. That's a really good deal. I'm going to stop there on my way home. And, look, all the frozen vegetables are on sale for, 4 for 5 bags or something like that. Well, that's the time to stock up. And then you've got the meat, and you've got all these other opportunities to save within the grocery store and outsmart them because they don't really want you to buy food that's less expensive. They want you to buy food that, that they're making money. All those like Cheerio boxes, I'll see like the end caps of Cheerios or pasta or whatever when I go to the grocery store, and I'm just like, that might be on sale, but that company paid an awful lot of money for that to exist. Mm-hmm. That's artificial. And a lot of times you can find ingredients that you wouldn't necessarily look for that are lower down or higher up because everything that's at eye level is also paid for. That's all paid shelf space. So you just got to get a little savvier and notice like what the sales are, what's coming in your circular, and not being stuck or married to one supermarket. Don't be afraid to shop around because I assure you, like, as much as people at the grocery store can be nice, maybe, or maybe they're not, you're just a customer. That's it. At the end of the day, you're just somebody spending money. You need to be in your own corner when it comes to shopping for groceries.
And so you're proving that just because you have lots of funds or you don't have the money, you can still eat gluten-free and healthy with very little.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And it's also great for and for somebody, and it doesn't even have to be for that, like somebody who just wants to be a little more cost conscious, like they're like, I'd love to spend more money on organic, but right now I'm looking at my, $300 or $400 a week bill, and I'm like, whoa, that's ridiculous. Why am I spending so much money on food? Or maybe you want to, join a cow share, or you want to do a CSA or something like that, and you're like, well, how am I going to do that? I'm already spending this much money on food as is. So,
interesting.
Whatever you want to do to find ways around your budgetary concerns, there's a way to do that. But I would tell people and really advise you, don't reduce the nutrient density of your food and the quality of your food simply because you think like the box of mac and cheese that's on sale is somehow a better deal. It's really not, because no box of mac and cheese is going to fill you up.
Right.
So you want to look for food that you're going to eat and it's going to fill you up, that it can, and preferably in my mind, it can either freeze as a leftover or it can last in the refrigerator as leftovers. That way at least it's going further and you're not eating out, which costs an exorbitant amount of money when you actually do the math, if you figure out how much your homemade meals cost as opposed to going out to dinner.
Right. Great tip. I love it. And I will be posting, of course, a link to your book and a link to your website, which just let me tell everybody, your website is glutenfreeschool.com. Connect with Jennifer on Facebook. She's facebook.com /glutenfreeschool. She's on Twitter at gfreeschool. She's on Pinterest, gfreeschool, and Instagram at gfreeschool. Make sure you connect with Jennifer. I did a year ago, and I am so grateful that I did because I've learned a ton of stuff from Jennifer. Not only that, but pick up her book. It's on Amazon. It will change your life. Once again, her book is called The Savvy Gluten-Free Shopper, How to Eat Healthy Without Breaking the Bank. So wait, before I let you go, I heard that you have a new program that's going to be super beneficial for our Mega Wellness Summit listeners.
Yeah, so we decided to launch a premium community option because, I love my community, and believe it or not, I actually answer much of the stuff that's on social media. But we decided to take, like, my podcast, for example, the Gluten-Free School podcast. I decided to take audios that are similar to that. They're very educational, and I also did my own summit last year and do things that are really informative and impactful and give everybody like earlier access to a lot of these things. And so now we've got a great Facebook community that's private, so I get to interact with people on a more one-on-one basis. We've got calls, we've got recipes that aren't published on the website or in my book. And so it's a really great space to find like-minded gluten-free folks that are looking for an honest, and I mean that actually, a very honest perception of what gluten-free should look like without the dogma or this like beautifying of like, oh, gluten-free is healthy. Like, come on, it's cinnamon rolls, like it's not healthy, it's dessert. So, we're really about empowering and inspiring our community to make different steps, whatever they need to do in order to feel better. And that's what this much more intimate community is about. And I hope that maybe some of you will check it out and join me.
Jennifer, such a pleasure. You are just a ball of information, and I appreciate every second of this call, and I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and I wish everyone the best of luck on their journey. You can totally do this. You can do anything you put your mind to, and I'm so appreciative, Nikki, that you were willing to put this whole event together to help inspire everyone and light a fire under our butts to get us going and finally feeling better. So thank you for having me. I appreciate it.